dysfunctional family. And spoilers. Welcome to the channel, I'm Hayes. I talk movies all day, so subscribe right now if you want to be entertained. And today, I want to talk about Too Fast, Too Furious, the first sequel in what would go on to be the greatest family drama of all time. So how this works is I'm going to go through the movie, point out all the reasons I can find as to why it's trash, and then at the end, drop a few final thoughts. So the movie starts off with showing that these Miami street punks are at least a little bit smarter than the LA street punks by putting up a road close sign instead of waiting around for somebody to get murdered. But here's the thing, I don't know about you, but if I see a road close sign but no road works or any major obstructions, I'm driving past it. Now I ain't saying that's what you should do, I'm just saying 1, maybe 2 times out of 10, you're probably gonna be fine. Anyway, now I ain't no illegal street racing expert that knows the difference between a Gallo 12 and a Gallo 24, but if you're gonna have an illegal street race, maybe it's not such a good idea to tell that many people about it. I mean, what do? Organize this on MySpace? Why did Suki wipe the side of the car when she walked by? That was the most pointless car wipe ever. The car is already clean and she still got what, 4 girls cleaning it even more? Just for her to walk by and barely touch it with a microfiber cloth and be like, "Alright ladies, we're good. You did nothing to help, bro." This guy has the best role in the movie. So apparently they can't race without a 4th racer. Why? It's an illegal street race. I think they can be a little flexible with that rule. Also, since they do need a 4th and Slapjack knew that Joaquin couldn't make it, why not say something earlier? Are you dumb? Also, Julius refers to Suki as a skirt, even though she isn't wearing a skirt. Now I know it's supposed to be a derogatory term because she's a woman, but at this point, even by 2003 standards, that's just a lazy insult. Also, Tej tells Brian that he's got 4 minutes to get to the race. However, about 1 minute and 45 seconds ago, Tej said, "We go live in 5, which really means Brian has closer to 3 minutes to get there. Also, why spray paint the start line on the ground? Wouldn't it be better to leave as little evidence as possible? So when they introduced Slapjack, he was getting mad at his girlfriend for pulling the comb out of his hair. I mean, to be fair, she did yank it out kinda hard. And then, it turns out he's relying on illegal street races to pay rent. I'm just saying, this could be an unofficial prequel to 4 Colored Girls. Alright, let's see if we can understand what's happening here. The Fast and the Furious ended with Brian giving Dominic Toretto keys to a 10-second car so that he can escape the cops. And in the 2 years since, Brian moved to Miami and became a respected and feared illegal street racer. Now that actually begs a lot of questions. Do they know he's a former dirty cop? And if so, how did he earn their trust? And surely his crime would carry a sentence a lot longer than 2 years, so has he been evading the cops all this time? Because this guy don't seem that hard to find. If anything, Too Fast, Too Furious should have been all about Mia Toretto and how she has to win illegal street races to keep the family sandwich shop from going out of business. Matter of fact, speaking of Mia, what happened to her? Did Brian just abandon her in LA because they couldn't afford to get Vin Diesel to come back? This guy cannot be trusted. Also, Tej tells Brian to remember him when he whacks. Okay, is that a Karate Kid reference or some kind of masturbation thing? Also, earlier Tej said that he couldn't race without a 4th. Now he's telling Slapjack he can go home if he don't want to throw in the 35 large. Because what? Brian said so? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that whole wax thing was a masturbation reference. Also, I don't know if this matters. In fact, it probably doesn't matter at all. But Brian's car is the only one that's right-hand drive. Why is Suki driving with the top down? Surely an illegal streets racer would know that the extra wind drag would make it a lot harder to reach top speed. So when Brian makes a last turn, he says, "Home stretch, baby." But since Brian was a last-minute addition, how would he know that's the last section? Do they race the same route each time? Or are they that familiar with the streets that he knew that would be the logical last stretch? Either way, surely that means they knew there was a bridge there, so when Tej gave the word to raise it, none of them should have been surprised. Slapjack died in this scene. I like Suki. She just lost $3,500, has a smashed up car, but still celebrates finishing the race. That's a good attitude to have. But speaking of money, and maybe I'm nitpicking just a little bit too much here, but Tej says he has over 10 stacks for Brian, which is true. But since there were 4 of them all putting $3,500 each, then wouldn't it be more appropriate to just say he has 14 stacks for Brian? Unless he's only given him the $10,500 from the other 3 races. And if that's the case, then why would Brian give Tej more money when he's already taken his cut? Are you dumb?
Hey, make sure you bring that body by the garage later, alright? So we can work on that front end of yours.
That's actually pretty funny because her front end is practically non-existent. Plus she has an exposed midsection and there ain't nothing special at the back. I was talking about a car, by the way. So anyway, the police catch Brian and give him an ultimatum. Either help him catch big-time cartel criminal Cartel or they throw him in prison for all the crimes he committed in LA. So Brian has been evading the cops all this time. It really took them 2 years to find him? Really? And it just so happens to be when they need his help catching a bigger criminal? Really? But here's the thing, why is that crime list so long? He let his mark go scot-free, which I guess counts as obstruction of justice and aiding and abetting, which are pretty big offenses, but that's like, what, 2 things? So what all these other things Brian did between the 2 movies? Because anybody committing that many crimes and then skipping over to a whole new state? I don't think it's a good idea to be asking him to help. Unless all the other crimes are just parking violations or something. But even still, how is he committing that many crimes and it's taken 2 years for the cops to find him? And then they find him at the spot he hangs out at enough times to be considered a feared and respected illegal street racer, but it's on the one day he wasn't even supposed to be there. Really? Matter of fact, how long has Brian been in Miami? Because that's a lot of crimes to be committed in one city and then move to another city where he's presumably been there long enough to be an important part of the illegal street race culture. So was he committing these crimes while he was still a cop in LA? Or did he just go wild for 6 months and then move to Miami? Either way, Brian cannot be trusted. Anyway, they said that Carter has been having trouble getting his money out of Miami, which is why they need Brian to pose as a street racer coming to join his crew. So this Carter Verone guy never heard of money laundering? And instead he's gonna hire street racers to drive the money out of Miami? Like, how much attention would somebody driving a kitted up car out of town draw to themselves? Surely it would be better to just use common delivery vehicles. This movie did not need to happen. Or at the very least it should have been called Not Too Fast and You Can Never Be Too Cautious. Anyway, Brian says he won't help unless he gets to pick his partner. And so now we're introduced to Roman Pearce, the badass crazy mofo. Matter of fact, this guy is so crazy, he participates in a crash derby with no protective gear on. None. No helmet, no levers, nothing. Which makes me wonder, is this supposed to be an illegal crash derby? Especially considering that at that time, and as far as I can tell, there still isn't a speedway in Barstow. So if this is indeed an illegal crash derby, then Roman Pearce is openly committing crimes while on home arrest. Why would the police still take him on? That's 2 untrustworthy criminals. There's no way this went well. Also, did they really travel the near 3,000 miles from Miami to Barstow just to get this one guy because Brian said so? Surely now that Agent Dunn knows pizza places don't make motor parts, he's the better option. And how did they travel the near 3,000 miles and at no point Agent Bilkins looked up Roman Pearce? Like, why is he only finding out now that Roman is on house arrest? Don't you think you should have gotten that information before you left? Anyway, on 2 occasions Roman asks Agent Bilkins for confirmation on something Brian said. First, if it's true that Brian isn't a cop anymore, and second, if it's true the deal is legit. But here's the thing, why? I mean, we know he's Agent Bilkins of the FBI, but at this point, he hasn't actually been introduced to Roman, nor has he shown any ID. So how does Roman know to ask him for confirmation? To be fair, Agent Bilkins does have that "the father I never had" kinda look, and they're both bald, so yeah. Anyway, they're back in Miami now and Roman is not sure if he should be trusting Brian. Now I can definitely understand having second thoughts, but you've traveled nearly 3,000 miles. Suck it up. True say though, Roman shouldn't be trusting Brian. Matter of fact, nobody should be trusting Brian. He let his mark go, he abandoned his girlfriend, associates with street criminals, and he's wearing a West Coast Choppers t-shirt but doesn't ride a motorcycle. Just saying, there's a lot of good reasons to not trust Brian. So I know these guys are trying to be cool or whatever, but they really should be wearing seatbelts. There's no excuses for that. And the whole stare and drive thing that Brian does, yeah, it looks cool, but it's just another reason to not trust Brian, since he's only just started working with the cops again and he's already behaving recklessly to impress a girl. Anyway, so the big bad Carter Verone has a test for the would-be transporters, which is to retrieve a package from an impounded car. Thing is, he doesn't actually tell them where it is. I mean, he doesn't give them an actual address. So as part of the test, they're supposed to just figure it out along the way? Because delivery drivers would know exactly where they're going before before they leave, so this seems like a dumb way to test them. Speaking of dumb, it was dumb for this guy to try driving between lorries, but since he did, and got chewed up, why didn't the lorry drivers stop? Is Miami just full of crooks? Everyone driving with no insurance or something? So here's something I think is interesting. American highways really do have those yellow barrels by the exits. They're called fish barrels and are used to absorb impact in the event of a collision. So, although it looks like it, that guy did not die in this scene. Who wrote this? It's supposed to be about Roman Pearce, but it starts off talking about Brian and then refers to him as a she. I guess it shouldn't be surprising. Fast and Furious movies are kind of known for their diversity. So did Ferrari agree to have one of their cars in a movie where somebody punches through the window? Ferrari, who make real high-end cars in real life, let one of their cars be shown to have a security flaw? Okay. Also, how is Roman strong enough to punch through a car window, but he couldn't knock out this protein-deficient Johnny Bravo with one hit? The math ain't mathin'. So Agent Markham showed up at an impound lot because of course the cars are being tracked and he thought Brian and Roman were gonna do a runner. He was wrong about that, but he was right not to trust him. Anyway, why did Agent Markham think they were running? Monica said she hired extra thugs to make it look legit, so surely she would have known or at least suspected there was going to be a test that she could have warned Markham about. Matter of fact, Markham don't look like he started yesterday, so surely a customs agent should have moved with a lot more caution just in case it wasn't what they thought it was. And these extra thugs that Monica hires to make it look legit, apparently they're in it for real, so what would have happened if one of them got to the package first? And with the way they were driving, including 2 highway collisions, how are there not more police showing up? This was not a plan. They got lucky. Oh, this is clever. They're using Brian's fake alias from the first movie. I'd have to assume that in an off-camera moment, Agent Bilkins told Agent Markham about Brian's alias, and then Markham relays that information to Monica so she knew what to search. And that would mean Monica definitely could have told Markham about the test. Another thing that could have happened is that at some point Brian went home to get his fake alias driver license, which he then gave to Monica, which turned out to be a good idea. Too bad nobody thought to do that for Roman though. Speaking of Roman, his record says that he's 6'2". Brian says he's 6'1". Me thinks somebody is telling fibs. Anyway, Roman asks Brian, what are you checking her out for? Well, I think a better question would be, why isn't Roman checking her out? Clearly the actors and the camera have been positioned so that our eyes are naturally drawn to the slender form. I was talking about the car, by the way. But anyway, Roman's laugh makes this scene.
I'll just take it off your cut.
So Carter says the boatyard is his and then he brags, do you really think that I would let somebody impound my car? But if he's such a hotshot, then why does he need these bozos to travel his money out of town? And why is his house bugged? Or did he mean there's people inside his own home he can't trust? Either way, not such a hotshot. Furthermore, if his house has ears, then Agent Markham really should have known it was a test. But it is kind of interesting that Carter takes the cost of replacing the boatyard gate off their cut, but not the cost of replacing the car window. Anyway, at least now it's become clear why Carter wants street races, because he can buy a short window from cops, but after that he needs people who are skilled at driving high speeds to make the getaway. But here's the thing, even if they do make the getaway, anyone driving like that is drawing a lot of attention to themselves. They would not be hard to find. So yeah, I still think he'd have been better off using regular delivery drivers. This introduction seems weird to me. I mean, I know Brian mainly wanted to introduce Roman to Tej, but Suki is close to him, and the whole time Brian is telling Roman about Tej, Suki is looking up, then putting her head back down, then looking up again like she's just waiting to be noticed, and then Brian says hello to her, but doesn't actually introduce her to Roman, just some blasé, yeah she's good, she's the best. Also, Suki shows Brian her drawing and says, it's a work in progress, it's not finished yet, which is a redundant statement. A work in progress means it's not finished. Anyway, why is Tej hosting the water sport contest next to his garage? That just seems like a terrible idea, and apparently they do it like that every day. You're just asking for trouble. Also, in the first movie, there's a party scene where Area Codes is playing, and during the opening for this movie, somebody was playing Act a Fool out their car speakers, which means Ludacris exists in the Fast and Furious universe. So, why does nobody, not even Roman meeting him for the first time, comment on how much Tej looks like him?
No, there's only one problem.
What's that?
Fuentes, Barone's tapping her.
Tapping her how?
Agent Bilkins not knowing what Roman meant by Verona's tapping Fuentes is probably the sweetest, most innocent moment in this movie. But here's the thing, even if Carter is playing in Monica's garden, why would that be a problem in getting Carter for laundering? I think the only problem would be that transporting drug money out of town would not come under laundering. I mean, it's still a crime, just not that one. So Brian and Roman race Fabio and Fonzie on the blacktop for slips. Suki then says loser walks home. She seems to have a habit of saying things that don't need to be said. Furthermore, the loser doesn't have to walk home. They can still get a cab. It might seem weird Tej making threats of violence if the loser don't hand over their keys, but as it turns out, this was only about a year before he got swole. So the rules are they gotta drive up to the barrel and then come back, but there is no one at the other end where the barrel is, and it's too far for them to see from the start line, so they just relying on everyone being honest? Bunch of untrustworthy crooks, but they're gonna be honest about this? To be fair, it turns out they all did drive up to the barrel, but just saying, it's a big risk. Also, why is this guy here? I mean, I ain't trying to be ageist or nothing, but he looks way older than everybody else. This guy looks like if Kurt Angle didn't lose to Edge. I hope he took this loss as a sign to just go home and take care of his family before his wife cheats on him with a basketball player. But anyway, I have nothing bad to say about the scene where they meet Carter Verone in the club. Cole Hauser plays the menacing bad guy well, and that's even before he tortured the cop with a rat in a bucket. You know, I'm starting to think Monica is just shit at her job. I mean, she clearly has a covert way of making contact with Agent Markham. We saw that earlier. Yet, she didn't let Markham know that Carter was going to test a new recruit. And now she turns up at Brian's spot just to tell him something she should be telling Markham. You really gonna risk life, limb, and this whole operation just to get a sneaky little kiss from the guy who abandoned his last girlfriend? Plus, how long was Monica there for? From time Roman came in and said Verone's boys are outside, she should have legged it. Instead, she's wasting time worse than Trinity in the Matrix. And Verone's boys are dumb as well. It was beyond obvious that Roman was stalling them, and even if it wasn't obvious, there's no good reason for them to be indulging him. They should have just pushed past Roman. Instead, they wait until Monica's had more than enough time to slip away. Like, how does such a badass villain like Carter Verone employ two nitwits as his right-hand men? And speaking of nitwits, when Roman asks Brian,
what the hell was she doing in there?
Carter and his two thugs would still have been close enough to hear him talking, but you know, plot convenience or whatever. Also, turns out Monica didn't tell Carter where she was going, which is probably why he went looking for her. So you telling me she's been living with him undercover all this time and she didn't know that would set him off? Even after he threatened to kill her if she touches another man, she didn't think maybe she should make up some lie about where she's going to avoid all that? Yeah, Monica is shit at her job. I think this is supposed to be a touching scene. It's shot like it's supposed to be a touching scene. But here's the thing, Brian doesn't actually apologize to Roman. He basically just says there's nothing he could have done, but in a nicer way, which to be fair might be just the truth of the situation. I'm just saying, maybe he could have chose different words. Also, Roman admits that it was never Brian's fault, but surely he must have known that all along. So you telling me Roman held on to a grudge against Brian for over 3 years for something that he caused himself? Are you dumb? Well, actually, where was Brian while Roman was in prison? He didn't visit him while he was inside, nor when he got out, just showed up out the blue all of a sudden when he needed something? Yeah, some friend.
I got Verone's navigator leaving the residence.
Copy.
Agent Markham really should have known Carter was testing them. I'ma take back what I said. At least this guy's not a nitwit. I can respect a man who respects art. Actually, no, he is a nitwit. Dude, way too late to be asking that question. So here's the thing about this chase scene. I know Brian and Roman are expert illegal street racers / crash derby guys, so their driving skills are gonna be on point. However, cops train to drive at high speeds too, so even if the cops aren't as good at driving as Brian and Roman, they should at least be better than this. Brian and Roman swapping cars in a warehouse was a good idea, but the fact that neither Carter or Agent Markham thought of it kinda shows how incompetent both the feds and the crooks actually are. Also, why is Slapjack there? The last time we saw him, he'd crashed his car into a billboard, and now his car looks fixed up and he's helping the guy who took his rent money? So did he win more money? If so, how did he do that in a smashed up car? Or does he have other skills he can make a living from? If so, maybe he should be doing that instead. In any case, Slapjack should not be here. Better go home before this really does become the prequel to Four Colored Girls. So this initially struck me as odd, but turns out that it is actually possible to connect a radio to a mobile phone. That said, I'm still pretty skeptical about anyone in police custody being allowed to just answer the phone like that. And this officer taking notes? Why is he writing over things that have already been written? That is definitely odd. So it turns out Carter Verone only told one person about the airstrip, which is how he knew Monica was a double agent. But the fact that he only told Monica means he was already suspecting her and just needed confirmation. So if he was suspecting her, then why wasn't Monica suspecting that he was suspecting her? She's been with him for a year and didn't think that his recent behavior warranted extra vigilance? Or if indeed he is always like that, then surely she should have already known that there was a possibility that the airstrip was a decoy and made sure Brian knew not to say anything about it and for Agent Markham to not move on them until they have a clear visual. So yeah, Monica is shit at her job.
You know I like you, but I still gotta kill you. It's my job.
You know, you don't have to kill him if you don't want to. I'm just saying, if your job is making you do things that you don't want to do, maybe it's time to quit that job. Anyway, from the time Enrique pointed the gun at Brian until Roman ran his car into them is about 20 seconds. In that time, Brian was clicking the eject seat button repeatedly, but it wasn't working. So instead of Enrique asking, "What's that?" multiple times, just shoot the guy. Not even a joke, that was just awesome. Here's the thing though, there's a wooden barrier when they were approaching the ramp, then all of a sudden, it's moved? Like, shouldn't they be crashing through it? Plus the ramp seems a bit more elevated, and what are the odds that a ramp is going to be in just the right position for them to jump a car into a boat? Especially when that boat was already moving for how long?
I think I broke my arm, man.
Well, technically Brian broke your arm with that reckless driving, just saying. Also, from the time Carter had a gun on them to the time Carter gets shot is about 7 seconds. Brian and Roman should have died in this scene. The movie ends with an implication that Carter Verone would be back for Brian and Roman in a future movie. Boy, I can't wait for that to happen. They also have Agent Markham, who started out being against Brian and Roman, coming to trust Brian and Roman and letting them get away with initially lying about how many bags they had. And then of course it turns out they really can't be trusted. Alright, so before I get into my final thoughts, if you liked this movie, check out these movies. They're all films that involve an undercover cop, they're all remakes, reimaginings, reboots, and they're all great movies. The Departed if you want something more serious, Reservoir Dogs if you want something that makes you think it's more violent than it actually is, and 21 Jump Street if you just want something funny. Okay, so let's talk about Too Fast, Too Furious. I first saw this movie at the cinema when it was released, and I can remember thinking it was fantastic. It had great action, a solid story, and it was funny without feeling like they just forced a bunch of unnecessary jokes in there. And now, watching it again 20 years later, honestly, I still felt pretty much the same. Oftentimes when a sequel can't get back its main star, it's typically not a good sign. But Too Fast show that they can still go all out, bigger, over the top, and introduce new characters in a way that makes sense so that you still care about them. And speaking of making sense, there was a Twitter post that went around where the question was asked, at what moment did Fast and Furious abandon reality? Now I would 100% say that Fast and Furious abandoned reality from the very first movie. It was just perhaps a little more subtle then. This movie, however, I think it's fair to say that this is the film that really set a precedent for what the franchise would later become. From its use of technology to its cool but ultimately unrealistic stunts. You see, the first movie was a film about family, friendship, trust and loyalty with a street race setting and some action scenes. This film, however, is just a straight up action movie with a partial street race setting and a reference or two to family, friendship, trust and loyalty. So though it doesn't hold as much depth as the first film, it is definitely far more entertaining. And by the way, to be clear, I ain't saying there's no depth. Carter Verone, played by Cole Hauser, is for me the biggest standout character of this film. Even during his calmer scenes, you know this guy's a psycho. It's like all he does is think about killing Brian and Roman, and you can see it in his face that he's just waiting for that moment. In fact, speaking of films that make you think they're more violent than they actually are, Carter Verone does not actually kill anyone in this film, yet you can still believe that he wouldn't hesitate to pull a bullet in anyone the second they're no longer useful to him. That is acting. And without rewatching all the other Fast movies right now, I think Carter Verone has got to be up there with the best villains of the franchise, certainly amongst the most convincing and legitimately scary. So for me, it's definitely a shame that even though they implied he might return, he hasn't actually returned. But since they just announced that Fast X is gonna have another 50,000 more parts to it, maybe there's still hope. But that's what I think of Too Fast, Too Furious. What do you think of Too Fast, Too Furious? Let me know down below, and while you're there, be sure to like, subscribe, and drop a suggestion if you don't mind.